Imagine a life measured not in hours, but in heartbeats. A life where the only sound you make is the scratching of a quill against parchment and the rustle of wool against stone. In the high mountains of 14th century Italy, there stood an abbey known for one thing: absolute, unbreakable silence. The monks there believed that words were the seeds of sin and silence was the language of God. For 50 years, Brother Thomas kept this vow. He watched seasons change, kings rise and fall, and storms batter the stone walls, all without uttering a single syllable. Until one Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a prayer. It was a simple sentence spoken in a dusty library that saved a masterpiece and changed the fate of the abbey forever. Tonight, we enter the quietest place on earth to hear the story of the monk who finally spoke. The year is 1342. We are in the Abbey of San Lucido, perched precariously on a jagged ridge of the Apennine Mountains. The air here is thin and cold, smelling of pine resin and wet limestone. To reach the abbey, one must walk a narrow mule track that winds upwards for 3 hours, leaving the noise of the villages far below. The abbey is a fortress of solitude. Its walls are 3 feet thick, built from gray stones hauled up from the riverbed centuries ago. The windows are narrow slits designed to let in light but keep out the distractions of the world. Inside, the temperature is always 10 degrees colder than the air outside. Brother Thomas is 70 years old. He has lived within these walls since he was 20. His world is defined by the stone archway of his cell, the long wooden table of the scriptorium, and the rhythmic tolling of the bell. Clang, clang, clang. The bell dictates everything. It tells him when to wake before dawn, when to pray 7 times a day, when to eat in silence, and when to work. Silence in San Lucido is not just a rule, it is a physical presence. It hangs in the corridors like a heavy tapestry. It is not an empty silence, it is a textured silence. If you listen closely, you can hear the building itself breathing. You can hear the wooden beams expanding in the summer heat and contracting with a crack in the winter frost. You can hear the distant bleating of the monastery's sheep on the hillside. You can hear the soft, rhythmic chanting coming from the chapel, the only time voices are allowed to be raised. Brother Thomas is a master scribe. His hands, though wrinkled and spotted with age, are steady. His fingers are permanently stained with ink, iron gall black, cinnabar red, and lapis lazuli blue. He does not speak to his brothers. If he needs a pot of ink, he uses a sign language developed over centuries, a tap on the nose for red, a rubbing of the thumb for parchment, a hand over the heart for prayer. They move past each other like ghosts in coarse brown robes. They communicate with nods, with slight bows, with the movement of their eyes. They know each other perfectly, yet they have never had a conversation. They know who snores. They know who walks with a limp. They know who eats their bread quickly and who savors it. It is an intimacy born of proximity, devoid of words. On this particular morning, the silence feels heavier than usual. The sky outside is the color of bruised iron. A storm is coming. But inside the scriptorium, the candles are lit. The beeswax smells sweet and heavy. Brother Thomas sits at his desk, sharpening his quill with a small silver knife. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound is loud in the quiet room. He blows the dust from the feather. He dips the nib into the black ink. He touches the parchment. He is working on the San Lucido Psalter. It is the magnum opus of the abbey, a book of psalms so beautiful, so intricate, that it has taken the monks 20 years to create. Thomas has been working on page 142 for 3 months. The silence wraps around him like a blanket. He finds comfort in it. Words, he believes, are messy. Words cause misunderstandings. Words can be lies. But ink is truth. Once it is dried on the page, it is eternal. Or so he thinks. The routine of the abbey was disrupted by the sound of hooves. Not the slow, plodding hooves of the abbey's donkeys, but the sharp, impatient clatter of fine horses. A delegation was arriving. The Bishop of Bologna was coming to inspect the abbey. In the 14th century, monasteries were not just spiritual centers, they were businesses. They owned land, they produced wool, wine, and honey, and occasionally the church hierarchy sent someone to check the books to ensure that the silence wasn't hiding heresy, or worse, hoarding wealth. Brother Thomas watched from the narrow window of the scriptorium. He saw the bishop dismount. He was a large man, wearing robes of fine red wool that looked shockingly bright against the gray stones of the abbey. He wore gold rings on his fingers. He spoke loudly to his servants. "Careful with that chest. The air is freezing up here. Do they not believe in fire?" His voice echoed in the courtyard, bouncing off the walls. To Thomas's ears, accustomed to whispers and wind, it sounded like a cannon blast. The abbot, a frail man named Father John, went out to meet him. Father John bowed low. He did not speak. He signaled to the guest master to lead the bishop to his quarters. The bishop seemed annoyed by the silence. "Come now, Father," he boomed. "I understand the rule, but surely a greeting is in order for your superior." Father John simply bowed again, his face serene, his lips sealed. The presence of the bishop changed the atmosphere of the abbey. The silence, usually peaceful, became tense. The monks walked faster. They kept their heads lower. They could feel the judgment of the outsider. The bishop and his entourage were given the best rooms. They were served the best wine. But they were noisy. They laughed at dinner. They clattered their spoons. They complained about the draft. For Brother Thomas, the intrusion was terrifying. The scriptorium was his sanctuary. It was the only place where he felt truly safe. But the bishop had announced that he wanted to see the treasures of the abbey. He wanted to see the books. Specifically, he wanted to see the great Psalter. The Psalter was nearly finished. It sat on a special lectern in the center of the room. It was huge, 2 feet tall when closed. The cover was made of oak boards covered in leather, studded with semi-precious stones. But the real treasure was inside. The illuminations, the capital letters wrapped in gold leaf, the tiny paintings of angels, birds, and beasts that adorned the margins. It was the soul of the abbey, distilled into ink and paper. Thomas returned to his desk, trying to block out the noise from the courtyard. He dipped his quill. He focused on the letter Q. He was painting a tiny quail inside the circle of the letter. It required absolute steadiness. Dip, hold breath, paint, exhale. He tried to ignore the feeling of dread settling in his stomach. The outside world had breached the walls, and noise, once it enters, is very hard to remove.
To understand what happened next, we must understand the chemistry of the medieval scriptorium. A book was not just written, it was engineered. The ink, iron gall ink, was made from oak galls, growths on oak trees caused by wasps, iron salts, and gum arabic. It was acidic. It bit into the parchment, becoming part of the skin. It dried relatively quickly, turning from a pale purple to a deep, indelible black. But the gold was different. Illumination used real gold. To make the letters shine, the monks used a technique called gilding. First, they would lay down a base. This was a sticky pink clay called bole, mixed with hide glue. They would paint the letter with this clay. It had to sit and dry until it was tacky, not wet, not dry, but somewhere in between. Then they would take a leaf of gold. gold beaten so thin that if you breathed on it, it would fly away and disappear into the air. They would gently lay the gold leaf onto the sticky clay. Then came the most crucial part, burnishing. Using a smooth stone, usually an agate or a dog's tooth attached to a stick, the monk would rub the gold. He would press down hard, polishing the metal until it fused with the clay and shone like a mirror. But here was the danger. If the clay was too wet, the gold would tear. If it was too dry, the gold wouldn't stick. And if you closed the book before the process was completely finished and set, the gold would stick to the facing page. If two pages stuck together, pulling them apart would rip the illumination to shreds. Decades of work could be ruined in a second of carelessness. On the day of the inspection, Brother Thomas was overseeing the final touches on the last page of the Psalter. A young novice, Brother Anselm, was applying the gold to the final Amen. Anselm was nervous. His hands shook slightly. "Steady," Thomas signaled with his eyes. The boy laid the gold down. It looked perfect, a pool of liquid light on the page. But the air in the room was damp because of the approaching storm. The clay was drying slower than usual. It remained tacky, dangerous. The bell rang for sext, noon prayer. Clang, clang. The door to the scriptorium burst open. The bishop entered. He was followed by Father John and two clerks. The bishop looked bored but expectant. "So," he said, his voice booming against the vaulted ceiling, "this is the factory of silence. Let us see what you have produced in 50 years. The monks stood up and bowed. Brother Thomas stood by the lectern, his heart racing. He looked at the page Brother Ansel had just gilded. It was wet. The gum Arabic was still glistening faintly at the edges. It needed hours to set. It needed to stay open. The bishop walked over to the great Psalter. He admired the jewels on the cover. He ran his hand over the leather. "Impressive," he grunted. "A heavy binding. Good oak." He didn't open it immediately. He walked around the room, picking up jars of pigment, sniffing the air. "Smells of vinegar," he muttered. He turned back to the Psalter. "Well, Father Abbot," the bishop said, turning to the frail leader, "let us close this chapter. I have seen enough. Pack this book. I will take it to Bologna to show the cardinal. It serves no purpose collecting dust up here." Thomas froze. Take the book? Now? The bishop reached out his hand. He grabbed the heavy wooden cover of the Psalter. He prepared to slam it shut. If he closed the book now, the wet gold on the final page would smash against the ink of the facing page. The Amen would be destroyed. The clay would glue the pages together. When opened later in Bologna, the pages would rip. The masterpiece would be ruined. The abbot saw it too. His eyes widened, but he was bound by his vow. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. 50 years of discipline held his tongue. The novice, Anselm, gasped silently, his face turning white. The bishop's hand began to move. The heavy oak cover creaked. It was descending. Creak. Time seemed to slow down. Thomas watched the shadow of the cover falling over the gold. He calculated the distance. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. The silence of the room was absolute, save for the creaking hinge. The vow of silence was a promise to God. To break it was a sin. To break it in front of a bishop was an act of rebellion. But to let the beauty die? To let the work of 20 years be obliterated by a moment of ignorance? Thomas looked at the gold. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was a prayer in visual form. The cover was 6 inches from closing. Thomas took a breath. The air felt cold in his lungs. He felt the vibration in his throat, a sensation he hadn't felt in decades.
"The gold is not dry." The voice was rusty. It sounded like grinding stones. It cracked in the middle, but it was loud. It was commanding. It was human. The bishop froze. His hand stopped inches from the page. The sound hung in the air, echoing off the stone walls. Not dry, not dry. Every head in the room turned to Thomas. The monks looked terrified. The abbot looked stunned. The bishop looked at Thomas. He looked at the lowly monk in the ink-stained robe who had dared to shout at a prince of the church. The bishop's face turned red. "Who spoke?" he whispered dangerously. "Who dares break the rule?" Thomas did not look down. He stepped forward. He raised a shaking hand and pointed to the page. He did not speak again. He didn't need to. He pointed to the Amen. The bishop looked down. He leaned in closer. He saw the faint glimmer of wet gum arabic at the edge of the gold leaf. He saw the sticky pink clay. He realized what he had almost done. He realized that the heavy slap of the cover would have fused the pages into a solid block. The bishop slowly, very slowly, lifted the cover back to its open position. He stared at the wet gold. Then he stared at Thomas. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of submission. It was the silence of shock. Thomas stood trembling. He had broken his vow. He expected punishment. He expected to be cast out. The bishop straightened up. He looked at his own hand, then at the monk. A slow smile spread across the bishop's face. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was a smile of recognition. He recognized a craftsman protecting his trade. "The gold is not dry," the bishop repeated softly, testing the words. He looked at the abbot. "Father John," the bishop said quietly, "it seems your monks know when to speak. A vow that destroys beauty is no vow at all." He turned back to Thomas. He bowed his head slightly. A bishop bowing to a monk. "Thank you, brother. You have saved the psalm." The bishop turned to his clerks. "We do not take the book today. We wait. We wait until the gold is dry, even if it takes a week." The storm broke that evening. Thunder shook the abbey walls, but inside the scriptorium, the Psalter lay open and safe. Brother Thomas was not punished. Technically, he had committed a grave infraction, but the abbot simply called him into his office the next day. They sat in silence for a long time. Then the abbot pushed a piece of parchment across the table. On it, written in shaky Latin, were the words, "Vox in tempore opportuno, donum Dei est." A voice at the right time is a gift from God. Thomas returned to his cell. He never spoke again. He lived for another 10 years, grinding his ink, sharpening his quills, and watching the seasons turn. But the abbey changed. The silence was still there, but it was less rigid. The fear was gone. The monks understood that the rule was there to serve God, not to destroy his creation. The San Lucido Psalter survived. It sits today in a museum in Bologna. If you go there, you can ask to see page 142. You will see the great golden Amen. It is flawless. It shines like a mirror, reflecting the face of anyone who looks at it. It is a perfect piece of art, and it exists only because for 1 second a man chose the weight of ink over the weight of silence. As Thomas lay in his bed years later, waiting for the final silence of death, he thought about that sentence. He realized that a lifetime of silence gave that one sentence its power. Words are like gold leaf. If you use them too much, they become thin and cheap. But if you save them, if you hoard them for 50 years, they become heavy, they become solid, and when you finally spend them, they can stop the hand of a bishop and save a masterpiece. The bell tolls. Clang, clang. The lights in the abbey go out. The wind howls outside, but the book is closed now. The ink is dry, and the gold is safe forever. Sleep now.